like a good joke. A Frenchman, a Belgian, and a Brit walked into a pub. Except instead of a pub, they're about to walk onto a stage here. But real quick, as to who they are, we've got Robin, who is Belgian. He is the founder and editor-in-chief at Tech.eu, a seasoned European technology journalist who used to work at NextWeb and TechCrunch. Talk about TechCrunch, we have the editor-at-large, the man who was sitting over here interviewing Kevin Spacey, and the co-founder of Tech Hub, Mike Butcher, coming in. And to moderate that conversation, we've got the founder, the co-founder of Le Web. That's the Frenchman who'll be coming in. A European who now lives in Silicon Valley. He'll be here later as well. He's going to moderate the conversation, Loic Lemeur. So let's give a hand to these three gentlemen. Have fun. Enjoy.
I really could. This is not on. Is this on?
It is.
It is.
It is now.
Hi, how are you doing? My name is Loic, and I'm delighted that we look like this today. Really perfect. Like, by the way, red, green, blue.
My leather jacket has to go everywhere with me, so.
What do you mean? I always wear this on Sunday.
It's awesome.
You know?
Like, really. Anyway, so I've moved to San Francisco 9 years ago, so I thought that was a great session for me. What's happening in Europe?
You missed all the fun.
You missed all the fun, dude. Well, the Brits have really pissed off with everybody.
Yeah, well, tell me about that. Why did you guys...
We want to build a wall. We want to build a wall between us and you. We're sick of all this European food.
You don't need a wall. You have an island. You don't even need it.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
So you're very European, like Mike. You believe in Europe, right? So why is your country doing this?
That's a good question. Everybody's gone absolutely fucking crazy. We've basically we have incredibly right-wing media who've been bashing this thing for years. And when somebody bashes you over the head, you hate Europe, hate Europe, hate Europe for years and years and years. This is the sort of thing that happens. And then an idiot like David Cameron says, so what do you guys think? And puts it to the country, and people tick the wrong box. A whole bunch of people ticked the box and just went, huh? I didn't know we were leaving. I was just doing it for fun. And literally, seriously, people didn't really take it that seriously, a lot of them. And now you've got untangling. You have to untangle 40 years of relationships, 40 years of law, 40 years of shared purpose, and it's basically
do you see an
going to be
impact
crazy.
on the technology scene already in the UK or not at all? Like, does anyone really
There's
care?
been no
real estate is going down, right?
There's been no actual definitive study yet on the effect on the tech scene. TechCrunch is going to be bringing out its own survey in a couple of weeks ahead of TechCrunch Disrupt in London, December 5th and 6th, by the way. Put it in your diaries. Come.
And if you put Mike as a discount code now, you get a discount.
You can tweet me or email me, mike@techcrunch.com. You never know when something might turn up for you. Or buy it now before it gets more expensive. But the issue is nobody's done a definitive study of the impact of Brexit on the tech scene. Anecdotally, it would appear that some people have lost developers, engineers. Some people have lost investors because of the uncertainty. But I think the way to think about Brexit really is going to be about, it's like a super tanker slowing down. You know, it takes a super tanker 5 miles to come to a dead stop when you hit at the brakes, as it were. And that's what it's going to take with Brexit. It's going to take about 5 years for it to play out, even if Article 50 is invoked and bang, all the negotiations start. It'll take a long time.
Okay, Robin.
Hi.
Hi. What's happening in Europe? What's the latest? Like, are you excited, or is it like, because like Mike doesn't seem excited at all? Like he's. Really,
I'm just like this all the time.
He's talking about a super tanker slowing down.
We're journalists, so we're supposed to be cynical.
Yeah.
But in general, I don't think. I mean, Europe's doing well when it comes to technology. Like development's going well.
Give me a few facts.
A few facts. Last quarter, second quarter of this year, European tech companies raised more than 4 billion euros across about 800 deals. I think about 22 billion in exits that quarter as well. 12 billion total last year.
So people generally say the problem with Europe versus Silicon Valley is there are no exits. So
It's a
this
myth.
doesn't seem to be true.
It's a myth, but it's also true that most of these exits are smaller, way smaller than the US. But that's always the problem when you compare it to places like the Valley and Boston. Increasingly China, to be honest, is that the numbers pale in comparison. But if you only look at the numbers, then they're going up and to the right. So should we be excited? Yes. Should we be saying that we're on the same level as the US? No.
How about the legal, Mike, if you like? But like, I remember I started a few things in Europe a long time ago. And if you want to start like your service, launch it in Germany, you have to deal with local, everything, right? You want to hire an employee, you need a local subsidiary. You need to cope with German, and I'm taking German just because I'm in Germany, but France would be worse, of course. But it's very difficult. Is it still so difficult?
No.
Like if I'm in the US, I can launch US-wide. I don't have to worry about that.
I mean, I'm not no expert, but I think a few years ago in Germany, if you launched a company, if the company went bust, there was, you'd be personally liable for 20,000 euros, or the first 5% or something of debt. That's all gone away now. The German government's made it much easier to launch a company. I'm not sure who thinks. Should we have a show of hands? Who thinks it's easier to launch a company now in Germany? Put your hand up than say 5 years ago, 10 years ago. A few. Who thinks it's still as hard? Still hard? No, actually, you're okay. You guys are a bit not really very one, are you? You need a bit of vague.
It's more like 10%. Raise their hands, 90% is asleep.
Yes, they're all on their phones, checking their Facebook, Snapchatting their dick to somebody. Look, the issue here is it's always been traditionally hard in some places in Europe. The UK, of course, has always been incredibly easy. You can start a company in an hour online in the UK, no problem. But
I love it that you're really advertising your own country, like.
Well,
Okay.
But it's true. But it's getting easier. I think it's still pretty damn hard to fire people in France.
Okay, so can we talk about
which is why you left.
The exciting.
Because you were scared of being fired.
No, I've left just because I paraglide. I can paraglide 20 minutes from my office.
That's the only reason?
I kite surf under the Golden Gate Bridge. It's amazing, And then
you could have done that under the Eiffel Tower.
Right here in Munich, you can kite surf on the river. I heard, or surf at least. Yeah. No, it's really cool out there. But I love Europe. I'm here. I come back. I drink. It's all good. So tell me about the exciting companies, because to be honest with you, seen from Silicon Valley, you don't hear so much about Europe. I mean, that's just a fact. You don't. Like, it's because it's very self-centered around, like, if you're not between Palo Alto and San Francisco,
you're in a bubble. You live in a bubble.
People don't
But I mean,
care so much.
it's also a little bit Europeans' fault, because they're not as loud and as promotional as they maybe should be about their own companies even. Usually they launch a company, they wait about 3 years till everything's right, and then they raise their hand and say, hey, we exist. Americans will start talking about their company before it exists, right? So we're not as, I don't know, we don't celebrate success as much as we probably should. So we don't talk about the successes that we've already had.
Why don't you celebrate it now?
Well, listen,
so
you know a lot of these companies already.
No, I don't know. Like, if you tell me what I'm excited or what we're talking about bots. A lot. Chatbots. A lot of bots. Everybody's obsessed with bots. We're talking about VR. We're talking about, obviously, Snapchat versus Facebook.
You also talk about artificial intelligence. And Google bought probably one of the smartest AI companies out there was DeepMind, and they were from the UK.
That was 2 years ago.
Yeah, you can talk about gaming, which brings you to the Supercells and the Rovios and the King.coms of this world. There are some companies out there that are.
Okay, so what are the new? Give me each three new companies that are not like Klarna and not like
Well,
Spotify.
Apple is. Look, you got to think that some of the size of the companies are much smaller. There's a company called Weave.ai in the UK, which the FT recently said that Apple was considering buying, and that made the
What
FT.
do they do?
Artificial intelligence on a smartphone. So Siri-like AI, but natively on a smartphone. Without going into lots of lists of companies, the point I think what you're trying to make is that European entrepreneurs tend to be bad at PRing themselves unless they do what you did and went to Silicon Valley and pretended to be a Silicon Valley company when it was actually being built in Romania. Remember?
Did I do that?
Yeah. Do you remember?
Oh, you mean I had a team there? I still have engineers in France. It's fine.
So there you go. All your PR and marketing was in Silicon Valley.
So that's a good trick. Like when I moved to San Francisco, you immediately become Loic from Silicon Valley.
Of course.
So that makes you different immediately. Yeah, that's right. It's a good trick. We're
Yes.
getting PR tricks by Mike Butcher and Robin Wouters.
Of course.
That's cool.
So you positioned yourself as a Silicon Valley startup. People didn't care whether you had engineers in Romania or in France. They cared about what the product was, and they cared about the fact that you were there to talk to.
Okay, so that's number one tip. What's another tip, Robin?
I have a question for you.
No, I'm the one asking questions here.
Damn it. What
Okay,
was your
fine.
question?
The question is,
Do people in Silicon Valley know BlaBlaCar, for example? Would people know about BlaBlaCar?
yeah, they do.
So BlaBlaCar is the company that's raised the most funding ever in France as a tech startup.
How much was the funding again?
I think they've raised about 350 million to date.
a
So
lot.
they're a unicorn. They were
Yeah.
valued above $1 billion.
Yeah.
But whatever.
No,
they're
no,
not,
it's
they're not
impressive.
in the US. They've not launched in the US. Their markets that they're focusing on are in Europe. They're in Mexico. They're in India. They've raised money from the US. They don't have a team there. They haven't launched there. They have no plans to launch there, by the way. So you don't need to be in the US.
But
Certain companies don't need to be in
They
the
also
US.
don't have plans, if I understand well, to launch there because the distances are so
Of course.
big in the US that it wouldn't make sense to do.
But they're still a huge company getting a lot of attention worldwide for what they're doing.
Yeah, and that's a typical European story in the sense that they'll often look internationally before the US, and by the time that a US company looks to expand internationally, that's when they start thinking about an acquisition maybe of a smart company that has expanded into markets they wouldn't even have thought about.
What's happening with countries we talk about less? We were just talking about it with like Italy, for example. Is there anything happening there?
Italy is a little bit of a black hole, but I don't want to get into a debate about that. But what's interesting about Europe, that every single small country that you go to, there's something happening. If there wasn't anything happening 5 years ago, now there's something, right? There's an incubator, an angel investment community starting to make a difference. There are some interesting companies coming out, maybe some exits here and there. Facebook's bought companies in Belarus for crying out loud.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there's something happening in all of these places, and it's going to take many, many years for them to get any near the maturity that some of the other locations like Berlin and London have. But they don't necessarily have to, as long as it's moving forward, and it seems like it is.
You need to read more tech news, Loic, because Facebook is buying companies and Google is buying companies. Google Ventures in the UK is investing quite heavily in Europe, especially in health tech. So it's all going on. The point is that, from your perspective, is that Silicon Valley is a bubble, and then the rest of the world is a lot more complicated. So it's just a matter of media perception, basically.
No, you're right. We actually don't talk much about what's happening in the rest of the world in general. It's really in between those two.
I mean, if you want to kind of, I've always thought that Europe is an interesting triangle between the hottest sort of areas of Europe. Have always been an interesting triangle between the UK, Germany, and Scandinavia, in terms of the most high growth companies and the biggest amounts of funding. Then you've got some sort of new hot areas like Barcelona. Lisbon's going to be interesting with Web Summit going there this year, 50,000 people turning up. And then in Central Europe, there's lots and lots of companies that tend to have to try and punch out to a bigger place like London or to the
And there's
Valley.
much more money, right? So Atomico is $1 billion now, is it?
Atomico is kind of moved more into growth capital recently.
It just raised a 700 million
But less
euro
startups.
fund, right?
Less startups.
And I was just meeting last week with Samir. How do you say that in German?
Oliver Samver.
Oliver and Mark Samver.
What did Oliver Samver have to say to
Yeah,
you?
so they went to Silicon Valley and they have $1 billion fund, and they're investing in Silicon Valley. And I asked why. They said there are more exits. So it's very interesting to hear German. So they're super successful
They're
here.
getting they're deciding to leave Germany now. Have we got
I don't
breaking
know.
news on stage?
I don't know. I tell you, they were in Silicon Valley last week with $1 billion checkbook.
Excuse me, I'll have to go and file a story.
Go ahead. Well, listen, Rocco, the internet's kind of a force of nature. You can't really get around them, especially not in Germany. But look at the headlines. I mean, they've gone public, a while ago, so you can see their numbers. They're pretty transparent. They have to be. They're losing 700 million on their top portfolio companies just this year. already, right? So they're a loss-making company.
They've raised some large amounts of money, especially from the Middle East, I believe, right? And
I don't know.
And so those investors, their LPs in their fund, are going, okay, guys, what are you going to do? Because some of that stuff is not working. So that's a big issue for them. But then I think it's going to be tricky for those guys because if, for instance, if they tried to go into Silicon Valley and tried to start investing, it might be complicated because so much of Silicon Valley has been pissed off basically with the way that the Salma brothers and the Rocket Internet cloned so many Silicon Valley companies like Vim do with Airbnb or Zalando or whatever.
There is a joke in Silicon Valley, actually, that might not be appropriate to say here, but there is one, is that you made it if a German start copying you. And this is, of course, referring to them, not the room here.
But they have a shitty reputation for a good reason, but they also don't get the credit that they deserve in a way as a school for entrepreneurs. A lot of founders that go into Rocket Internet companies move on and build really sustainable, viable businesses that we should admire. And they come out of the Rocket School where they learn about execution, efficient advertising, the way you do e-commerce in different markets, the way you internationalize.
I have an engineer that worked with them, and he learned a lot, for sure.
It's a good academy in a way for entrepreneurs.
Okay, so I think we had 15 minutes, so we'll probably have to...
So we have like 4 minutes left.
We have 4 minutes left, perfect.
Yeah.
So how do we optimize those 4 minutes?
How do we optimize?
I understand you're very excited about Europe. I am, listening to you. I'm very excited about this, by the way, Bits and Pretzels, that did not exist, and congrats to the whole team for that.
As you probably gathered, there's been so many more conferences start up in the last few years. I also do my own called the Europas in June. And so with so many events and so many conferences and so many ways for entrepreneurs to connect with each other, with investors, also with clusters developing, that was always the really big trouble with a lot of European places was, where do you find people? Where do you go? Like in Berlin, it was started out in Mitte, now it's in, all around the kind of that eastern city. In Paris, there was Silicon Sentier, and even that's still going on today. And London is Shoreditch. So you get these clusters of startups, and that's where the investors can find people. That's really, really helped. And the VCs have got bigger. There have been many more funds launched in the last 18 months, 2 years. So there's a lot more competition for deals. And the bridges have also started to be built between Silicon Valley and Europe. So that means, and in fact, very interestingly, I think that New York is going to become a big arm of the European ecosystem, as vice versa.
Because a lot of Europeans move to New York.
It's just closer. And Europeans quite like New York because it reminds them, it has more of a European feel to it, and there's it's much easier to deal with teams back in Europe because the hours are better.
So that's all the good stuff. I can tell you what some of the problems are that Europe faces if you want.
I would have not asked about the problems because I don't want to be that guy asking about the problems, but
I'll
please,
tell you.
If you want
That's
to.
your job, though.
So it's a mixture of things, right? Europe kind of struggles with sometimes lack of ambition of founders, lack of late-stage funding, like really serious growth capital is really hard to come by. What else? Stigma of failure. It's really bad. It's a cultural thing, so it doesn't change overnight, but it's really holding people back, I think. Most politicians being completely disconnected from the entrepreneur world, and this is both on a local, national level and in Europe, and I see this quite a lot. Digital single market, that's not going to happen anytime soon, and not in the way that some of us would have wanted to. So those are some of the things that we really struggle with, right? Lack of talent is another one. Not necessarily engineers, developers.
Lack of talent? Yeah, you have
not
a ton
technical.
of engineers.
Tons of technical talent, but talent of people that have scaled companies before and have the experience in sales, in marketing, and business development. That's some of the... If you ask entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs in Europe, what's your biggest problem? It's not going to be capital. It's not going to be we don't have a market. It's going to be we can't find enough talent fast enough to scale this business globally.
Well, I think I agree with that to some extent. I think that is changing, and also you've started to see some of the really super experienced people from the Valley start to come and do like a year over in Europe. Or
well, we have Tony Fadell
open.
on stage in an hour or so, and he's based here now.
Yeah, exactly.
He's going to talk about that.
Yeah, and so I think that's totally started happening in the last few years. So I think it's, things are going to the right. Yes, there are some problems. I think that the EU really needs to get its act together now, definitely post-Brexit, and start addressing the concerns of entrepreneurs, not of big business and corporates.
What's the valuation of a startup that does seed in Europe these days? Like if you're launching a product and you find just angels, like a few 100,000 or a few millions, let's say 200 to 2 or 3 million.
5 to 10 or something?
I'd say roughly half of what you would get in the Valley.
Well, the Valley went down. The Valley was...
Yeah, but then it goes down in Europe too.
I think it would be roughly half, but then the amount invested was less
the
anyway.
Valley is like 5 right now. It used to be 10. It's
And
like
also,
5.
it doesn't cost, $100,000 or $150,000 for a junior developer like it does in San Francisco right now. It doesn't cost you $5,000 a month for a single-bedroom apartment.
How much is a developer in the UK?
In Silicon Valley. How much is a developer in the UK? Junior developer? I don't know. Something like, 40, 35, 40, something like that.
Yeah, so a beginner in Silicon Valley is 100. Tall beginner.
That's
and
right,
then you go up to 150.
But I mean, lower
the
valuations and
costs are different.
the costs being much lower to build a company is also the reason why a lot of US investors look at Europe. A lot of Asian investors look at Europe as well.
Britain's just got a hell of a lot cheaper to invest in.
Sorry?
Britain's just got hell of a lot cheaper to invest in. Come over, we need your money.
All right, guys, I think we're out of time. We'd have loved to take questions from the room, but we can't. But I'll see you later with Tony in a bit.
Well done, Loic. Thanks.
Thank you very much, guys. I'm very enthusiastic about Europe
Thank
now.
you.
Okay, Matteo. All right.